What's up guys, it's Brad from Light Architect here. I hope everyone is staying safe amidst what is going on right now. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create a dirt style explosion similar to the explosion seen in the 1917 movie trailer. We actually updated the KHAOS add-on with a new dynamic dirt operator here, so if you don't have the latest build, be sure to go back to Blender Market and download it there because we will be using this for this tutorial. As I mentioned in my previous video, because of what is going on right now, we are having a 50% off sale on Blender Market for all of the Light Architect products, including KHAOS, City Builder 3D, Light Architect, and the CableCam Cinematic Movement Rig, so be sure to check out the discount code in the description if you're interested in any of those products. Anyways guys, let's get started. Here we are inside of Blender. Of course, the first thing we're going to do is just delete everything in our scene here. And now we're just going to add a basic ground plane to our scene that will interact with our smoke and particles. So we'll use the collision cube operator here, and then we'll just scale it down on the Z-axis and then scale it up a little bit, scale it down a little more. Something like this should work pretty well. And now, as usual, we will choose where on the timeline when we want our explosion to start. So say frame 20, and then we will have our 3D cursor be where we want the explosion to come from. And now let's go ahead and adjust our KHAOS particle parameters here. We'll leave most of these at their default except for the particle start size we'll put at 1, and the particle end size we'll put at 0.5, and we'll leave these the same. We'll change the initial starting velocity to something like 0.15, and then same thing for the initial ending velocity. You can play around with these, but these are some good settings that I found worked for me. Then we are going to go ahead and check the dynamic dirt checkbox here. So we'll go ahead and check that. And now we'll just select the 360 ground burst operator here. And now, as you can see, a dirt domain for our dirt explosion as well as our 360 ground burst operator has been added to our scene here. We'll go ahead and bring this dirt operator up, and then bring our domain cube up as well to surround where our particles would be. So we'll just play through it here and see what's happening. And this is looking pretty cool, but we're going to adjust a few settings here. Go ahead and bring up our smoke domain. Just surrounds our smoke here. Something like that should look pretty good, maybe a little bit bigger. Alright, now we'll go ahead and select our 360 ground burst here, and we'll just scale our operator up on the Z-axis here to get those particles blasting upward as much as possible. Then we'll scale it down a little bit as well, and we'll just place it as close to the ground plane as possible, something like this. Alright, so we have something like this right now. Let's go ahead and go to our particle panel and adjust a few settings. So we'll go to the particle tab here, and we'll change the number of dirt particles to something like 850. And we'll put the end frame one down from where we usually were. The lifetime will be at 4. That looks pretty good. Under the viewport display, I find it's nice sometimes to display this as a cross to get a little bit better idea. Oops, not circle, cross here. Just to get a little bit better idea of where the particles are going. This is what's happening right now, which is looking pretty cool. Might scale this up a little more. Alright, so this will be the main portion of our explosion that will be blasting upwards. So if we just play through it here, something like that will look pretty cool. We might increase the randomness a bit on our lifetime. Looking pretty cool. Alright, so now we're going to add another dirt 360 ground burst that will be blasting our dirt particles around the bottom of our ground plane here. So we'll go ahead and go back to frame 20. And we'll use the same settings that we used on our initial operator here. And we'll just press 360 ground burst. And we'll just move this one up. And we'll scale it down on the Z-axis to flatten it out a bit. Something like this. And we'll also, under the particle tab, we'll also change this to cross so we can see it better. And we have something like this right now, which is okay. We'll go ahead and go under our particle panel. We'll increase the number to something like 900 as well. Let's see what that does for us. And this is looking pretty good. The dust wave should not be quite as big as our main upward explosion here, so we'll go ahead and decrease the lifetime to 2. And then we have something like this. And this is essentially the base of our explosion. I might bring the ending frame to something like 24, just so it would be a little more sudden. Yeah, that's better. So essentially what we're doing here is we're using our operators to build the base of our explosion, and this new custom domain for the dirt that will be added to your scene automatically is going to allow the smoke that these particles emit to act more like dirt inside of this domain cube. So it'll essentially have more weight and it won't go up as much once it's blasted out. Alright, so now we have something like this, which is looking pretty cool, but I'm going to add a few more 360 ground burst operators to give it a little bit more of a unique result. So we'll go back to frame 20 here, and we'll go ahead and add one more, and we'll just scale this one up a lot on the Z-axis, and we'll just kind of put this one blasting out to the side here, something like this. And we'll also increase the number here to something like 500. We're just kind of building our blast here. We'll go ahead and change our viewport display on this one to cross as well. And as you can see, there's a more dense particle field of dirt, where this one will blast out more concentrated particles. And what we can do here is we can press Shift D and duplicate this particle system. And make sure you press your duplicate particle system button over here as well. And then you can rotate this around and sort of blast particles in different directions. I'm going to duplicate it one more time with Shift D, and then duplicate the particle system again, and kind of put it here somewhere. And I might duplicate our dust wave ground burst as well, so we'll press Shift D, and we'll just scale this one up slightly on the Z-axis, and this one will just kind of fill in the gap. We're trying to get this gap in between our two blasts to fill in a little bit. Something like this. Maybe it's a little bit too big. Put something like 400 particles. Alright, something like this is looking pretty cool, and this is something that you really want to experiment with depending on how you want your explosion to look. But as you can see here, I can kind of guess what this dirt blast is going to look like. We're going to have high concentrations of dirt where most of the particles are, and then some kind of streaming particles where they're just kind of some singular crosses here. But I think this is going to look pretty good. I might go to our ground burst dust wave here really quick and just scale it down a little bit more. Something like this. Alright, so now that we've used the KHAOS Dynamic Dirt 360 ground burst operators here to build the base of our explosion, let's go ahead and select our dirt domain here and adjust a few of the settings. We'll go here to the physics tab, and we'll change the resolution divisions to something like 260. And this is going to give us a larger scale look. You can actually increase this more if you want a little bit more streaming particles, but I found that this works pretty well. Then we want to make sure that under the cache here, we choose the right start and end frame to bake our dirt and smoke. We can do this particular example for around 4 or 5 seconds. So maybe since we're starting at frame 20 at 24 frames per second, we'll do something like 128. And then we also want to actually select the dissolve button here. So let's go ahead and select that, but we also want to increase the amount of time that it takes for the dirt to dissolve. So since we're doing our explosion for around 4 seconds, we'll go ahead and change the time for its dissolve to something like 8 seconds, so maybe around 200. Again, this is something you can play around with as well, but it's just essentially the longer this is, the more frames it's going to take for your smoke to dissolve once it's in your scene. Alright, this is looking pretty cool. Let's go ahead and save our project really quickly. Just go ahead and call this Dirt Explosion Tutorial. Alright, so now that we've saved our project, let's go ahead and select where we want to save our smoke cache. So we'll go here and we'll find that same folder, and we'll make a folder called Dirt Cache. That's where we're going to save all of our smoke simulation data. And now that we've set all that up, let's go ahead and do our first test bake. So we'll just go to our settings here and go ahead and press Bake Data, and then give your computer some time to simulate your explosion. Alright, so we are back, and this is our baked dirt explosion simulation, and it's looking pretty cool here. Let's go ahead and see what it looks playing back in real time. So to do that, let's use the OpenGL render active viewport option here. So we'll just change our output to something like 65, and then we'll just press viewport render animation to render it out in real time so we can play it back and see what we're dealing with. And what Blender is going to do here is just going to go through all of the frames with the viewport as it is right now, and then we can play back this explosion in real time so we can see how it's looking in real time in case we need to make any adjustments before we bake this with more high resolution noise on top of it. Before we play it back in real time, let's go ahead and change our end frame of our animation to the end frame of our cache. So as you can see here, our end frame of our cache is frame 128, so we'll just change our end frame of our animation to 128 as well. And now we can just go to render and view animation, and now we can see our explosion playing back in real time here. And it's looking pretty good. I think there are a lot of things we could change about this. For example, I think the dust comes out at the bottom a little bit too much, but it's looking pretty cool, and it has those dirt-like characteristics, blasting upwards and then dissolving as it comes back down because of the way this dirt domain is set up. So we'll go ahead and X this, and we'll just go ahead and view this through our render mode to see what we're getting so far. And right now we're actually seeing this inside of the Eevee rendering engine, so we don't actually want to do this. We want to see this inside of Cycles, so we'll go to the camera tab here. We'll change our render engine here to Cycles, and now we can see our explosion. And this is looking pretty cool. We have some nice streaks of dirt debris coming out here. We can put this on top of a field in a desert or something. Once we light it, we can go ahead and choose a few more frames here to see how it's looking at different parts of the explosion. Here it's kind of like dissipating a little bit. It's kind of spreading out. And then at the end of the explosion, everything kind of is dissolving away, which I think will be pretty accurate. So I think this will be a pretty nice explosion to render out and bake with some high resolution. I do think that we added a little bit too much particles here down by the base because it's getting kind of heavy at the bottom here, and we should have added some more particles up top, but I think it still will look pretty realistic. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with this result. But if you want to experiment with different particle settings, you can play around with all of your Dirt Blast 360 ground burst particle systems and then rebake your simulation before you bake your noise for high resolution on top of it. Alright, so now let's go ahead and select our domain cube, and then we'll go to the physics tab here. And now to bake this with high resolution on top of it, we're going to go to the noise checkbox here, and we'll go ahead and check that. And you can choose how much you want to up-res your smoke by, but I think a factor of 2 will look pretty nice for this specific example. If you're trying to render a close-up of your explosion, you might want to bring this to 3 or 4, but the higher this will go, the more detail you will add, but it will also take longer to bake your simulation with that noise. So we'll leave it at 2, the strength at 1, the scale at 2, and the time at 0.1, and then we'll go ahead and save our project once more, and then press bake noise, and then give your computer some time to bake that noise on top of the original simulation for some higher detail inside of your dirt explosion. Alright guys, so we are back, and we have baked the up-res factor onto our smoke simulation, and this is our result here. It's looking really awesome. Now before this tutorial gets too long, I'm going to show you how you can light your smoke and then export your explosion with an alpha channel so you can composite onto a live action shot or animation of your choice. Alright, so let's go ahead and choose a frame of our explosion that we like here, maybe somewhere around frame 30, just where the explosion is going to start. And now we'll just add a few lights to our scene here. We'll just press Shift A, and we'll add a area light here. And we'll just put this off to the side, something like this. And we'll just scale it up a little bit so it's a slightly larger source. That looks pretty nice. And then we'll just go ahead and go to our light settings here, and we'll change this power to 1000. Now let's go ahead and go to rendered view here and see what we're getting with that. It's looking pretty nice, but let's go ahead and increase that a little bit so we have a little bit more detail in our smoke. So maybe we'll try something like 6000. That's looking a little bit nicer. I think we'll have some more detail inside of our smoke. As you can see, if we go to frame right after our explosion starts, maybe frame 25, we can start to kind of see the dirt trails in our explosion here as we lit it with this area light here. So let's go ahead and duplicate this area light just so we can add one more light source to our scene. So we'll press Shift D while it's selected, and then we'll move this second source off to the other side just to kind of fill in our shadows a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and change the power on this second source to maybe 2000, just so it's a little bit less than the original one. And now let's go ahead and add an environment to our scene so we have some ambient lighting. So we'll go to the environment panel here and we'll make this a sky texture. And if you're adding this to a live action shot, you can match the preview version of this sky preview here to your live action shot. But this is looking pretty good for our example. We might increase this strength to something like 1.2 just to give a little bit more ambient light. All right, so now let's go ahead and add a camera and choose where we want that camera to be. So we'll press Shift A, we'll add a camera. We'll just pull it back here on the X-axis. We can pull it up a little bit. And then we can view through the camera here. And we'll just kind of position this in a way that captures the whole explosion. Something like that will look pretty good. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and make this ground plane a shadows only layer so we can render our explosion with a shadow on an alpha channel underneath it for compositing onto a live action shot. So we'll go ahead and scale our ground plane up a little bit, something like this. Alright, so something like this should look pretty good. Now let's go ahead and select our smoke domain, and we'll go to our shading tab so we can adjust the material of our smoke so we can make sure it's not too dense or not dense enough. Let's go ahead and click that here. And as you can see, we're in the Eevee rendering engine now, so we'll go ahead and change that over here to cycles. And then we'll choose to view our explosion through the camera. Let's see what we have here. As you can see, our smoke was looking pretty dense compared to our preview here. Since we want our smoke to fade out over time, we want to actually see the dissolve. So let's go ahead and decrease the density of our smoke a little bit to maybe something like 68. And we'll keep the contrast of our smoke at 1 and see what we're getting so far. I actually realized that I forgot to make our ground plane a shadows only layer here. I just increased the size of it. So to make this a shadows only plane, we'll go ahead and select it again. We'll go to the object properties tab here. Then we'll go under visibility. We'll check the shadow catcher checkbox. And now let's go ahead and select our domain and get back to messing with our materials. So we can see our materials more effectively. Let's go to the render tab here and we'll go under the light paths. We'll change the volume bounces to 4. And then under volumes, we'll change the step size to 0.05 and then the max steps to 260. And now if we view the rendered version, we can actually see the light bouncing around the smoke much better. Alright, so let's go to a earlier frame of our explosion to get a better idea of what it's going to look like. So we'll go to frame, maybe say frame 30, or frame 32 maybe. So we'll go to shading and see what we're getting right there. And for this specific example, since we're just doing a dirt explosion and we're not involving any fire at all, we don't actually have to play around with any of this bottom half of the node setup here. We'll just be playing around with the value of the density and the contrast of the density. And this is actually looking surprisingly good here now that we've just decreased the density to 68 here. So let's maybe go to a further frame and see what it looks like there as well. You can also change the color of our smoke a bit. We might make it a little bit darker here, maybe something around there. But let's go ahead and go to a different frame and see how it looks at that part of the explosion, maybe frame 60. Take a look at it. And this can be a little tedious, but once you get it right, at least you know it's the right material for the job. The best way to test out a little render would be by doing an actual test render. So let's go ahead and do that since I'm pretty confident in these settings here. So we'll go to layout and we'll just do a low resolution render of our explosion. So we'll change the samples to something like 20. And we'll go to the output node. We'll change the resolution to 65 like it was before. And then we'll just go click on render image and give our computer some time to render out our explosion. Alright guys, so it took several minutes to render it out, but it's looking pretty good aside from some of the noise sampling issues, but we can definitely solve that by increasing the sampling a little bit. I think this is looking pretty good. You can of course change the density or the contrast of your explosion by simply playing around in the shading panel. How it looks will also depend on, of course, how many particles were in your scene, so it's something that will differ depending on what exactly you did to create your explosion utilizing different operators inside of KHAOS. Let's go ahead and exit here, and if you want to test out how your explosion is going to look on top of a live action shot, we could just go to the compositing area here and we could click on use nodes, and let's go ahead and see how this would look just very roughly on top of a photo or something. So we'll go ahead and press Shift A. We'll go ahead and add an output node for a viewer, We'll go ahead and bring these two nodes together. Now we can see our explosion here, and it's looking pretty rough right now. Again, that's just because of the samples, and also because we only rendered at 65% of our top resolution. But let's go ahead and press Shift A again, and we'll make a new input of an image, and we'll just go ahead and choose a background image. I just have one here. We'll just choose a landscape photo. I'm not sure which one this is. It's just a field or something, but just to get an idea of what our alpha channel is doing here and how much we're going to see through our smoke, it'll work just fine. So we'll go ahead and press Shift A again, and we'll go to color and alpha over. We'll go ahead and connect these nodes here, and then we'll connect this image to the bottom half. Actually, we should flip it to the top, something like this. And as you can see, we're getting some nice transparency in our smoke. So I think this is going to look pretty nice. If you want to see it more specifically, we could actually go ahead and scale our image here to the scene size, or to the image, or to the render size, I think. Yeah, that's better. So you can kind of get an idea of what's going on here. Obviously, you wouldn't composite this smoke in here. Maybe we can use a different image. Probably use a desert image or something instead. Let's see what else we have here. We can use maybe the first landscape photo instead. See what that is. Well, still not the best example, but you get the idea. Obviously, you would want to use a background that matches it. At least now we can kind of see how transparent our smoke really is, and I think this will be just about perfect for creating that dirt explosion look. But anyways, you get the idea. You can experiment with different backgrounds and see how dense you want to make your explosion and do some more test renders. But before this video gets any longer, let me show you how to export your explosion with an alpha channel so that you can composite it on top of your live action footage. And obviously, to match your explosion most optimally to your live action footage, you want to try to match the lighting of your 3D world to the environment you want to add your explosion to. So there's that to take into consideration as well. But again, let me just show you how to export your explosion, and you can worry about that for your specific needs. So the first thing that's very important here is that our image node with our explosion is connected to our composite output node here. That should be there by default, but just in case anything changed, just make sure that you switched it back. Then we'll just go to the layout mode here and make sure that you like where your camera is placed, obviously, because that is the angle your explosion will be rendered from. And now we'll just go to our output tab here, and we'll increase the resolution percentage to 100%. And then we'll go to the camera tab here. We'll go to the sampling. We'll increase the render samples to something like 40. And you can actually get away with less, but I think 40 is just about right. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's go to our output node again here, and we'll go under output. We'll change our file format to OpenEXR. And make sure it has an alpha channel so you can composite your explosion over a live action shot, photo, or animation. And yeah, let's go ahead and choose where we want to output our explosion here. So we'll go ahead and click here, and we'll just we'll save this. We'll add a new folder. We'll call it Dirt Blast Render, and then we'll go ahead and name our file, and we'll press accept. And then you want to make sure that your start and end frame here are the frames you want your explosion to be rendered for. So since we started our explosion at frame 20, we want to just do from frame 20 to frame 128 when our explosion ends. And yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Then you would just go ahead and save your project again, and then you would just press render and render animation, and then give your computer some time to render out all of your frames. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. As always, feel free to leave any comments if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. We hope you like these videos, and we hope you like the KHAOS add-on for Blender as well. We have recently released multi-user licenses for visual effects studios or educational institutions on all of our Blender add-ons. So check out those links in the description below in case it would be helpful for you to buy our products in bulk for your visual effects studio or school instead of buying individual licenses on Blender Market. Anyways, guys, let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you guys next time.